a 19mm socket, let's go ahead and remove our lug nuts. Now let's go ahead and remove our wheel and set it aside. Using a 15mm deep socket, we're going to go ahead and remove our sway-bar end link nut, securing that to the strut. The shaft here for our sway-bar end link stud is spinning, so we're going to put our 14mm wrench on the back side and then loosen. We're going to go ahead and remove the 21mm nuts from our two strut bolts here. Now from underneath the vehicle, we're going to go ahead and use our hammer, and we're going to go ahead and tap these strut bolts out of the knuckle. You want to be careful of the ABS sensor on the backside and not to hit that sensor or that harness at all. Let's go ahead and tap those out. We're not able to pull our bolt out right away, so we're going to use a small punch, and we'll get that in the back side of that and tap those through. Let's go ahead and separate our strut from our knuckle. Using a small pry bar between the knuckle and the strut, I'm going to go ahead and separate. Now that we have our strut separated from our knuckle and is mobile like that, let's go ahead and remove our upper portion of the strut. From inside the trunk area, what you want to do is go over to the passenger side wheel well liner, simply pull this down and away. This is going to expose the studs, the three studs for the upper portion of your strut. We're going to use our 15mm deep socket and our ratchet. And let's go ahead and remove those nuts. Now for clearance purposes here, using our deep socket and our ratchet, it's going to interact there. It's going to cause interference. We're switching over to a gear wrench. Allow us a lot more room to go ahead and work. Now we just have to get to the stud on the back side. Now you want to take into consideration that the last nut that you take off here is the last nut holding the strut in place. So if you want to, at this point here, you want to hop out, make sure that that strut is secure, either have someone helping you hold that strut in place, or you can just throw a strap or something on there to hold that strut from just falling out and crashing to the ground. All right, we got our third nut off of the strut tower here. Let's go ahead into the wheel well and pull our strut out. It's going to go back to our pry bar here, and you want to be careful. We're going to separate our knuckle from the strut and pull the strut down and in. You want to be careful that when the knuckle comes away that you're not causing too much pressure or pulling pressure on the flex line here. And work that knuckle and press that strut down while we're doing this. Try and give us a few bonks with a hammer. Work our strut free down below. We have our complete strut assembly and our spring compressing equipment here. So what we want to do is we're going to remove our upper strut nut here. You want to be careful and be cautious of using the proper equipment for this type of job. When you're doing this here, you also want to pay attention to the placement of your upper plate, your upper mounting plate, and your base of your strut. Our mounting bolts are facing one way, and as you come up, our upper plate is tilted inward. So you want to be careful and pay attention to something like this here. You want to make sure that you reinstall the new components the correct way. So using a 21mm socket, we're going to go ahead and remove this nut right here. Remove the nut, our cap. Set that aside. When we pull our upper mount, the strut itself will drop out from the bottom. You want to pay attention to our shape here. So here we have our replacement upper mount here. What we're going to do is we're going to assemble our strut assembly, but you can see that this has studs and this one does not. We're going to use the 3 bolts supplied. Once we put this strut up and into the vehicle, I'm going to go ahead and simply put the bolts through the body of the vehicle and down and thread them into our strut like so. You can go ahead and remove this one here. Take your new replacement part, set that right in a position like so. Let's go ahead and feed our strut up and into the upper mount. When you install your strut, you want to make sure that the tail of your coil spring fits into that notch in that lower isolator pad. We'll put our upper cup here onto the strut and go ahead and get that nut started. Let's go ahead and tighten up our bolt here for the strut. Now that we're all fully assembled, let's go ahead and release that spring tension. Let's go ahead and get this strut installed in the vehicle. Now on our upper strut mount here, it does not have the studs like the factory part. It comes with 3 bolts. Now when you install your strut up into the body, you want to go ahead and thread the bolts down and into the strut itself. What we're going to do is we're going to use 1 bolt. We're going to thread this in by hand. We're going to put that up and inside. And we're going to use this as a guide pin so we can go ahead and get the other 2 holes lined up once we're up there. You could try and put another bolt on the other side, but we're just having an issue fitting in another bolt on the other side where the spring is at on the underside of the bearing plate. So we're going to use this one as a guide. We're going to feed the strut up and in. We're going to install 1 bolt on the bottom, and then we'll go into the trunk area and we'll try and get these 2 bolts started here. Then we'll come back out, remove this stud, and then we'll put the 3rd stud in the trunk and get these tightened down. We're going to take our lower strut bolt. We're going to get that lined up and put that bolt into our strut. That's going to allow us to go ahead and pivot our strut back and forth. Now, with the vehicle lowered down a little bit, what we're going to do is use our jack underneath our knuckle, and we're going to go ahead and jack our strut up and into the body. That 1 bolt that we installed on our strut, we're going to go ahead and jack up the strut and get that stud to poke into the body, and that'll help us line things up. Once that stud is into the body, we can go ahead and climb into the trunk and get the other 2 bolts started. Now that we have that 1 stud lined up into the body, we can now reach into the trunk and go ahead and start threading in the other bolts. Now we have our 3 bolts started here. Let's go ahead and use a 13mm gear wrench to go ahead and tighten these down. So we switched over to a ratchet here to speed up the process. Make sure these bolts are in nice and snug. Let's go ahead and torque down these bolts to 7.4 foot-pounds. And take our rubber cap here. Go ahead and work that into place. Once we have that in place, we can go ahead and lift up our liner here. We'll go ahead and use a pry tool. I'm going to pop this in here. I'm going to go between the strut and the knuckle, push that in a little bit, and we're going to be able to get some leverage on that to get our bolt started. Once we get our bolt started on there, let's go ahead and tap that in. Once we've got our bolts in there, let's go ahead and get the nuts threaded on. We're going to use our 18mm wrench on the bolt side, and then we're going to go ahead and tighten these nuts down. Let's go ahead and torque our upper bolt to 96 foot-pounds. And then do the same for the lower bolt. I'm going to try and get the upper portion of our link lined up on our strut. Get that fed up into place. Let's get the nut started on that one as well. Use our 16mm thin wrench on the back side and our 16mm socket on the front. Let's tighten down our sway bar link nuts to 37 foot-pounds. Let's go ahead and install your wheel. Go ahead and get your lug nuts installed by hand, and then we'll go ahead and snug them all down. Torque your lug nuts down to 100 foot-pounds.